In the sun-baked hills of Texas, a storm is brewing that will shake the very foundations of justice. When greedy developers set their sights on James Cooper's ancestral farm, they thought they were dealing with just another aging veteran living out his golden years. What they didn't count on was Cooper's past as an elite Apache pilot, with 20 years of combat missions that earned him the call sign Thunderbird. But it's not his military record that has them worried now. It's the mysterious helicopter that just landed in his front yard, piloted by the most decorated special operations team in recent history. This isn't just a story about a land dispute. This is about how a group of corporate vultures learned that some warriors never forget their brothers in arms, and when you threaten one of their own, you face them all. What follows is the account of how one veteran's final stand would expose a web of corruption that reached from the dusty streets of Texas all the way to the state capitol. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn crept over the rolling hills of Cooper's farm like honey dripping from a jar, slow and golden. James Cooper had watched this same sunrise for 43 years, ever since his father first put the deed in his calloused hands. His boots crunched against the morning frost as he made his daily rounds, checking the fence line that had stood guard over his family's legacy for 3 generations. The farm wasn't much by modern standards, 200 acres of tough Texas soil that had been in the Cooper family since his grandfather returned from World War II, but to James, every inch was sacred ground. The old barn still bore the marks where his father had measured his height as a boy. The ancient oak tree by the creek still held the tire swing he'd hung for his daughter before she moved away to college. Even the weathered Apache helicopter, maintenance manual, dog-eared and coffee-stained, sat in its usual spot by his favorite armchair, a reminder of the life he'd lived before returning home. Sarah Martinez's pickup truck appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust along the access road. His neighbor of 15 years had become something of an early warning system lately, keeping him informed about the vultures circling their little piece of paradise. He could tell by the way she parked, crooked and rushed, that today's news wouldn't be good. "They got the Hendersons," Sarah called out as she slammed her truck door. Her silver hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her face etched with worry lines. "Those Summit Development bastards showed up yesterday with a briefcase full of cash and some fancy papers. By sundown, old Bill had signed everything away." Cooper's jaw tightened. The Hendersons' place was just 3 miles down the road, one of the last family farms in the area. "How many does that make now?" 7 in the past month. Sarah leaned against her truck, arms crossed. "They're working their way down the valley, Jim, buying everyone out one by one. Those that don't sell." She left the sentence hanging, but Cooper knew the rest. Strange accidents, mysterious property damage, sudden tax audits. Summit Development had a way of making life difficult for holdouts. A flash of memory hit him. The whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of rotor blades, the smell of aviation fuel, his team counting on him to get them out of a hot zone. He'd never left anyone behind then. He wouldn't start now. "They're building some kind of resort," Sarah continued. "Golf courses, luxury homes, the works. They're calling it Progress Ridge." She spat the name like it was poison. Cooper walked to his front porch and sat in the old rocking chair his wife had loved so much. From here, he could see the entire valley, the patchwork of farms that had sustained families for generations. Soon it would all be fairways and swimming pools for people who'd never worked a day of honest labor in their lives. The sound of an expensive engine drew their attention. A black SUV with tinted windows was making its way up his drive, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Men in suits, Summit's advance team, no doubt. "Here we go," Sarah muttered. Cooper stood slowly, deliberately. 20 years in the cockpit of an Apache had taught him the value of staying calm under pressure. These men thought they were walking onto just another farm to intimidate just another old man. They had no idea they were stepping onto a battlefield, facing a warrior who'd never learned how to surrender. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you might want to head home. Things could get interesting." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. As she drove away, Cooper watched the SUV getting closer. His hand brushed against the cell phone in his pocket, the one with a dozen numbers memorized, numbers belonging to men he'd trusted with his life in places the public would never know about. Men who still owed him favors, who lived by the same. Echoed he did. The SUV stopped, and 3 men in expensive suits stepped out, armed with briefcases and artificial smiles. Cooper let them walk halfway to his porch before speaking. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying the same command. Presence it had held in combat. "I believe you're trespassing." The Summit Development men had left 2 hours ago, their threats barely veiled behind corporate jargon and legal terminology. Cooper sat in his study, the last rays of sunset painting the room in shades of amber. His fingers traced the edges of an old photograph. 12 men standing in front of an Apache helicopter, faces streaked with desert dust, grins defying the death that lurked around every corner in those days. His cell phone lay on the desk before him, a message drafted but unsent. 20 years ago, these men had been more than a squad. They were family. Now they were scattered across the country, living lives far removed from their days of combat. Was it fair to drag them into his fight? The memory of their last mission, together, crashed over him like a wave. Kandahar Province, 2003. What should have been a routine extraction had turned into a firefight that lasted 3 days. They'd been outgunned, outnumbered, and running low on supplies. But they'd made it out, all of them, because they'd stuck together. Cooper pressed send. The responses came faster than he'd expected. First was Marcus "Doc" Rodriguez, their former medic who now ran a trauma center in Baltimore. "On my way." "Need anything patched up yet, old man?" Then came the others, one by one. John "Ghost" Phillips, their stealth specialist, now a successful security consultant in Seattle. Michael "Tank" Thompson, their heavy weapons expert, who'd traded his M240 for a mechanic's wrench in Detroit. William "Scout" Harrison, their reconnaissance man who'd become a wilderness guide in Montana. The last reply was from his former co-pilot, David "Whiskey" Wilson. Now, a commercial airline pilot, David had been there for every harrowing mission, every close call. His message was simple. "Wouldn't miss it, brother." "The bird still flies?" Cooper smiled, glancing out his window at the old barn. Under a heavy, in top, maintained with the same dedication he'd shown in combat, his personal Apache helicopter waited. He'd bought it at a military auction years ago, telling himself it was for crop dusting. Deep down, he'd always known a day like this might... A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah stood there, her face pale. "Jim, you need to see this." She handed him a tablet showing a news article. "They just announced their plans for the valley." The article detailed Summit Development's vision for Progress Ridge, a sprawling, luxury resort complex that would consume the entire valley. Environmental impact studies had been fast-tracked, permits rushed through. The article mentioned unanimous support from local officials, though Cooper knew none of the farmers had been consulted. "There's more," Sarah said, scrolling down. "Look who's behind Summit Development." Cooper's blood ran cold as he read the name, Senator Howard Matthews. The same man who'd tried to shut down their unit's investigation into private military contractors profiting from war crimes back in '02. The same man who'd buried evidence that could have exposed a network of corruption reaching the highest levels of government. "It's all connected," Cooper muttered, pieces falling into place. This wasn't just about land. It was about power, money, and old scores being settled. His phone buzzed again. A message from Tank. "Just talked to Ghost. He's been digging. Summits. Got private military contractors on standby. Ex-Blackwater types. They're expecting trouble." Cooper walked to his gun safe, entering the combination with practiced ease. Inside, alongside his personal weapons, lay a sealed envelope. Intelligence they'd gathered on Matthews years ago, evidence they'd been ordered to destroy, but that Cooper had preserved just in case. Another message chimed in, this time from Scout. Satellite imagery shows unusual activity at 3 locations around the valley. They're setting up before going public. We need to move fast. Cooper stepped onto his porch, watching the stars emerge in the Texas sky. In the distance, he could see lights moving on the Henderson property. Summit's people already beginning their work. Tomorrow, his brothers would start arriving. The valley that had given him peace after years of war was about to become a battlefield once again. He thought of all the families who'd lost their homes, of the corruption that had poisoned everything it touched, of the men who thought their money and power put them above justice. His mind drifted to the words his father had told him the day he inherited the farm. Son, some things are worth fighting for. Inside, his phone continued to light up with messages from his old team, men, who'd never forgotten what it meant to stand together. They were coming, bringing with them the skills that had made them legendary in combat. Summit Development thought they were dealing with one old veteran. They were about to face an army. Cooper smiled grimly. Perhaps it was time to show these corporate raiders why his call sign had been Thunderbird. The morning brought no peace. Cooper was checking the maintenance logs on his Apache when 3 black SUVs rolled up his driveway, followed by a police cruiser. Sheriff Mike Taylor stepped out first, a man Cooper had known for 20 years, now avoiding his gaze. Behind him came a woman in an expensive suit, flanked by 4 men whose stances screamed military contractor. "Official eviction notice, Mr. Cooper," the woman announced, her heels clicking against the gravel. "You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." She held out a thick envelope like it was a loaded weapon. Cooper wiped his hands slowly on a rag, taking his time. Julia Chen, right? Summit Development's chief legal officer. Did Senator Matthews send his regards? Her carefully composed expression flickered for just a moment. One of the contractors shifted his weight, hand drifting toward his concealed weapon. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Cooper, but this is completely legal." She gestured to the sheriff. "All the paperwork is in order. The county commissioners have approved the rezoning." "Funny thing about paperwork," Cooper said, reaching into his pocket. The contractors tensed, but he just pulled out his phone. "I've got some interesting documents myself. Like proof that 3 of those commissioners received substantial offshore payments 2 days before the vote." Chen's smile remained frozen in place, but her eyes had turned to ice. "Be careful, Mr. Cooper. Defamation is a serious charge. So is corruption." Cooper nodded toward the sheriff. "Hey, Mike, remember when my unit investigated those private military contractors back in '02? The ones working for then Representative Matthews? Interesting how some of those same names are showing up in Summit's paperwork." Sheriff Taylor finally met his eyes, conflict written across his face. "Jim, don't make this harder than it needs to be, please." "It's already hard, Mike. Question is, which side of it do you want to be on?" One of the contractors stepped forward. Tall, scarred face, the kind of man who solved problems with violence. "Listen, old man, this is happening whether you like it or not. Only question is how much pain you want to go through first." A distinctive sound cut through the tension. Helicopter rotors approaching. Everyone looked up as a civilian chopper appeared over the tree line, settling into a perfect landing in Cooper's front field. Doc Rodriguez stepped out, his medical bag in one hand, a large duffel in the other. He walked toward them with the calm confidence of a man who dealt with far worse situations. "Jim," he called out cheerfully, "hope I'm not interrupting. Though I gotta say," he looked at the contractors, "some of these fellows look like they might need medical attention. Soon." The lead contractor's face darkened. "This is private property." "Actually," Cooper said, "it's still my property, and these men—" Ghost and Tank emerged from the barn behind them, moving with the silent precision that had kept them alive in combat. "They're invited guests." Chen's composure cracked slightly. This wasn't in her script. "Mr. Cooper, if you're attempting to intimidate—" "No, Ms. Chen, I'm attempting to educate. See, you people think you can just roll in here, wave some papers around, and take whatever you want. You think money and corruption make you powerful." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But there are different kinds of power. The kind that comes from brotherhood, from loyalty, from knowing the men at your back would die for you and you for them." Scout's voice crackled over their radio. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Looks like private security. At least 3 teams." Cooper smiled. "Now you've got about 30 seconds to get off my land. After that, well..." He glanced at his old team, positioned and ready. "Let's just say we've handled worse odds in worse places." Chen looked at her contractors, then back at Cooper. For the first time, real fear crept into her expression. She'd come expecting to bully a lone veteran. Instead, she'd walked into a hornet's nest. "This isn't over," she snapped, retreating to her SUV. The contractors followed, their tough guy act somewhat deflated. Sheriff Taylor lingered. "Jim, they'll be back. With more men, more papers, maybe even federal agents." "I know, Mike. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" The sheriff looked at the eviction notice in his hand, then at the corrupt scene he'd just witnessed. Slowly, deliberately, he tore the papers in half. "I'll need to see that evidence about the commissioners." Cooper nodded. "Come by tonight. Bring anyone else who's tired of being on the wrong side of this." As the vehicles retreated, Doc walked up beside him. "Well, that was fun, just like old times." "They'll be back," Cooper said, watching dust clouds rise on the horizon. "With everything they've got." "Good," Tank called from the barn. "Been getting bored anyway." Cooper looked at his assembled team, men who'd dropped everything to stand with him, ready to face whatever came next. The real fight was just beginning, but for the first time since this started, he felt the odds shifting in their favor. "Ghosts." Voice crackled over the radio. "Jim, you're going to want to see this." Drone footage of their staging areas. They're not just building a resort. There's something else going on here. Cooper headed for the house, his team falling in behind him. Senator Matthews and Summit Development had just learned an important lesson. You don't threaten a man's home when that man has brothers in arms ready to fight. Midnight cast long shadows across the valley as Ghost's drone footage played on Cooper's study wall. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. Hidden behind the legitimate construction equipment were military-grade weapons, communications gear, and enough supplies for a small army. "They're not just building a resort," Ghost said, pointing to thermal imaging of underground structures. "These look like weapons caches, similar to what we saw in those PMC bases overseas." Senator Matthews is using Summit as cover, Cooper concluded. "And probably running guns, maybe worse. The resort's just a front for something bigger." Tank studied the footage. "Security's good, but sloppy. They're not expecting resistance, not real resistance anyway." "Then let's give them something to think about," Cooper said, unrolling a map of the valley. "Time to remind them who they're dealing with." 3 hours later, Summit's main equipment yard erupted in chaos. Their night security never saw Ghost slip through their perimeter, never detected the small charges he placed on their fuel tanks. The explosions weren't meant to destroy, just disable and demonstrate. Local news crews arrived by dawn, filming as millions of dollars in equipment burned. Summit's spokesperson called it vandalism. The farmers called it justice, but it was Cooper's anonymous tip to a Texas Rangers investigator about improperly stored explosives that really stirred the pot. "Look at this," Sarah said the next morning, showing them her tablet. Local social media was exploding with support. Other farmers were coming forward with stories of Summit's intimidation tactics. Someone had started a hashtag, Shang's Stand with Cooper, public opinion's shifting, Doc observed, cleaning his rifle. "But they'll hit back hard." He was right. By noon, Summit's security forces had doubled. Armed men patrolled the valley roads, harassing anyone they suspected of sympathizing with Cooper. But they'd made a crucial mistake. "They're stretching themselves thin," Scout reported from his observation post, "getting sloppy, aggressive, making enemies with every farmer they threaten." Cooper watched through binoculars as another Summit patrol passed his fence line. They were trying to provoke him, hoping he'd give them an excuse. Instead, he'd give them a lesson in asymmetric warfare. Tank had rigged the valley's old irrigation systems to create instant mud traps. Ghost had planted false electronic signatures to waste their patrol's time. Every hour they spent chasing shadows was another hour for support to grow, for evidence to spread, for their operation to unravel. "Jim," Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. "They're at the Henderson place. They're burning it." Cooper was moving before she finished speaking. From the barn, the distinctive sound of an Apache's engines spinning up split the night. They'd forced his hand. Now they'd learn why Thunderbird had been a name that struck fear into enemy hearts. The war for Cooper's Valley had begun. The Apache's appearance over the Henderson farm changed everything. Cooper didn't fire a shot. He didn't need to. The mere sight of a military helicopter emerging from the darkness sent Summit's thugs scrambling. By the time Sheriff Taylor arrived, the fires had been contained, and Summit's men were long gone. "You just escalated this to a whole new level, Jim," Taylor said, watching Cooper land the Apache with practiced precision. "They escalated it when they started burning people's homes," Cooper replied, powering down the aircraft. "Question is, whose side are you on now, Mike?" The sheriff looked at the smoldering remains of the Henderson farm, then at the gathering crowd of local farmers. His decision had been made for him. "I'll need deputies, people I can trust." "You'll have them," Cooper promised. Within 24 hours, the valley transformed. More of Cooper's old unit arrived, each bringing specialized skills and equipment. The farmers, led by Sarah, organized themselves into a communication network. Scout trained them in counter-surveillance, while Ghost set up a secure communications hub in Cooper's barn. "Just like the old days," Whiskey said, inspecting the Apache systems. "Except this time, we're fighting for our own backyard." Cooper watched as Tank instructed a group of farmers' sons, all military veterans themselves, in defensive tactics. These weren't just scared civilians anymore. They were becoming a militia, united against a common enemy. "Summit's pulling back," Ghost reported, monitoring their surveillance feeds. "Consolidating their forces at their main compound, but they're calling in reinforcements." "Good," Cooper said. "Let them come to us. We know this land, every hill, every creek, every hidden trail." They spent the day fortifying key positions. Old farming equipment became defensive barriers. Irrigation channels were modified to create obstacles. Solar-powered cameras watched every approach. Sarah organized the local media, ensuring their side of the story spread. Pictures of burned homes next to Summit's corporate logo. Stories of families fighting to save their heritage. The truth about Senator Matthews' connections to private military contractors. "They'll try to paint us as terrorists," Doc warned, watching the news coverage. "Let them try," Cooper replied. "The truth has a way of coming out." That evening, as the sun set over the valley, Cooper stood with his team on his porch. They could see Summit's compound in the distance, lit up like a military base. Tomorrow would bring more confrontations, more challenges. But tonight, they were together again, standing for something bigger than themselves. To the old guard, Whiskey raised his coffee mug in a toast. "And the new fight," Cooper added, watching the farmers' trucks patrol the valley roads. The war for their homes had only just begun, but already the tide was turning. Summit had money and political power, but Cooper's forces had something stronger, a cause worth fighting for and the skills to win. Ghost's laptop cast a blue glow across Cooper's study as file after file revealed the depth of Summit's corruption. The evidence Cooper had saved from their military days was just the beginning. Senator Matthews had spent years building his empire of shadows. "Look at these shell companies," Ghost said, tracing money trails across multiple screens. "Summit's just one piece. They've got similar operations in 3 other states, all using the same playbook. Force out local farmers, build luxury developments, use them as cover for weapons trafficking." Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her reporter's instincts firing. The environmental studies they filed are all forged. They're planning to dam a creek, divert water from half the valley's farms. Not just weapons, Doc added, reviewing geological surveys. These underground structures they're building, perfect for drug storage. Climate-controlled, remote location, legitimate business. Cover. Cooper spread the old intelligence files across his desk. Matthews was doing this back in '02, using private military contractors as cover for illegal arms deals. We almost had him then, until they shut down our investigation, Whiskey remembered bitterly. Called it national security. Sheriff Taylor arrived with more evidence, county records showing the pattern of intimidation, farms mysteriously foreclosed, tax assessments suddenly tripled, building code violations appearing out of nowhere. Got something bigger, Ghost announced, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Summit's not just buying land here, they're taking over water rights across the state. Within 5 years, they'll control most of Texas's aquifer access. It's not just about guns or drugs, Cooper realized. They're trying to control the water. In Texas, that's more valuable than oil. Sarah was already writing, documenting everything. We need to get this out. All of it. Not yet, Cooper cautioned. If we show our hand too soon, Matthews will bury it all. We need something they can't deny, something public. A call came in from Scout at his observation post. Movement at the Summit compound. Big meeting. Just spotted Julia Chen arriving with some serious-looking suits. Board meeting, Ghost confirmed, checking Summit's hacked calendar. Quarterly review. Every major player will be there. Cooper looked at the Apache through his window, then at his team. Time to let them know we've got their number. They spent the next hour planning. Ghost would document everything. Sarah would have her news team ready. Scout's people would cover every escape route. Most importantly, Cooper would remind them that the sky belonged to him. Remember, he told his team, we're not just fighting for my farm anymore. This is about stopping them before they take control of the whole state's water supply. As dawn approached, Cooper climbed into his Apache's cockpit, the familiar controls fitting his hands. Like old friends. Below, Summit's board members were arriving confident in their secure compound. They had no idea that their paper empire was about to start crumbling. Time to make some noise, Cooper said into his radio, starting the engine sequence. Let's show them what happens when they try to steal from Texas. The Apache's shadow fell across Summit's compound just as their board meeting began. Cooper held the helicopter steady at 3,000 feet, watching through his targeting system as panic erupted below. Executives in expensive suits scrambled for their cars, while private security forces deployed with military precision. "Ghost, you getting this?" Cooper asked, his camera system recording everything. Crystal clear. Their encrypted channels are going crazy. They're calling in every contractor in a 100-mile radius. Summit's response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 unmarked helicopters rose from concealed hangars, bristling with unauthorized military hardware. Cooper's radio crackled with, "Their threat, unidentified aircraft, you are in restricted airspace. Leave immediately or we will engage." "Restricted airspace?" Cooper replied calmly. "This is private property. My property. You're the ones trespassing." The lead helicopter fired a warning burst. Cooper's combat instincts took over, the Apache responding like an extension of his body. He dove beneath their fire, using the terrain he knew by heart to his advantage. Below, Summit's ground forces were mobilizing. Armored vehicles emerged from hidden garages, their presence confirming every suspicion about the operation's true nature. Sarah's news crews, positioned strategically around the valley, captured it all. "Contact!" Tank's voice crackled over the radio. Summit's forces had engaged their ground teams, trying to flank the farm's defensive positions. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley. Cooper kept the enemy helicopters occupied, leading them on a deadly dance through the hills. These weren't regular security forces. They were flying military patterns, using tactical formations. More proof of Summit's illegal operations. "Jim," Sarah's voice was urgent, "they're hitting civilian targets. They're trying to terrorize the other farmers into leaving." The Apache's weapon systems remained armed but silent. Cooper had planned for this. As Summit's forces spread themselves thin, they exposed their true nature to the world. Every news outlet in Texas was broadcasting their violence live. "Sheriff," Cooper called over the radio, "you getting all this?" "Got state troopers inbound," Taylor confirmed. "National Guard's been notified. They crossed a line hitting civilians." An explosion rocked the valley as one of Summit's helicopters crashed, trying to match Cooper's maneuvers through terrain they didn't know. The others pulled back, their pilots suddenly less confident. "They're running," Scout reported. The board members had evacuated, their convoy speeding away under heavy guard. But they were leaving something more valuable than money behind. Evidence. "Ghost, you're clear," Cooper ordered, keeping the remaining helicopters occupied. "Get what we need." Inside the compound, Ghost's infiltration team moved with practiced efficiency, downloading servers and securing documents. Everything Summit and Matthews had tried to hide was about to see daylight. The day would be remembered as the moment a corporate army was defeated by farmers and veterans who refused to surrender their homes. But as Cooper finally landed his Apache, he knew this was just the beginning. They'd exposed Summit's true nature, but Senator Matthews was still out there, and he wouldn't take this defeat lightly. "Good flying, Thunderbird," Whiskey said as Cooper climbed down from the cockpit. Cooper looked at the smoke rising from various points in the valley, the news helicopters circling overhead, the evidence being gathered. "Get ready," he told his team. "They'll be back, and next time they'll be desperate." The aftermath of the battle transformed Cooper's farm into an impromptu command center. Farmers streamed in from across the county, each with their own story of Summit's intimidation. Doc treated wounded civilians in the barn while Ghost processed. The intelligence they'd gathered found something interesting, Sarah said, reviewing county records. "Every farm Summit targeted has one thing in common. They all sit on top of major aquifer access points. They're not just taking our homes, they're systematically seizing control of the water table." Cooper watched as Tank trained another group of veterans, former Marines, Army Rangers, and Special Forces who'd been living quiet lives as farmers until Summit forced them into action. The valley had more defenders than the developers had realized. "Network's growing," Scout reported. "Got safe houses set up in every town within 50 miles. Local businesses are helping with supplies. Even got some sympathetic cops feeding us. Information." The evidence from Summit's compound was damning. Ghost had uncovered direct links between Senator Matthews and illegal arms shipments, proof of bribes to local officials, and detailed plans for controlling the region's water supply. "We can't release this yet," Cooper decided, reviewing the files. "The moment Matthews knows what we have, he'll burn everything down to cover his tracks." A truck pulled up outside, and William Henderson stepped out, the farmer who'd lost his home to Summit's arson. "Got news from town. Summit's bringing in more muscle, professional hit teams this time." Cooper nodded grimly. They'd expected this. "How's the evacuation plan coming?" "Got most of the families moved to safe locations," Doc reported, "using the old ranch houses and hunting cabins in the hills. Summit doesn't know half these places exist." The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. But instead of Summit's threats, it was a convoy of support. Farmers in pickup trucks, bringing food and supplies, veterans offering their skills, regular people who'd seen Summit's violence on the news and chosen their side. "This is bigger than us now," Whiskey observed, watching the volunteers organize themselves. "It's becoming a movement." Cooper walked to his porch, looking out over the valley he'd sworn to protect. Summit had wanted a war. Instead, they'd created an army, one built on community, loyalty, and the unshakable determination to protect their homes. "They'll hit us harder next time," he told his team, "but now they'll have to fight the whole valley." Dawn broke over the valley to the sound of helicopter rotors. Cooper's Apache led a formation of civilian aircraft, crop dusters, and private choppers piloted by local veterans. Below them, a convoy of trucks and farm equipment moved through. The morning mist. Summit was about to learn that their fancy military contractors weren't the only ones who knew how to wage war. "Ghost team in position," came the radio call. "Their security systems are about to have a very bad day." Cooper watched his tactical display as, one by one, Summit's surveillance systems went dark. In their compound, alarms would be blaring, communications failing. The confusion was only beginning. "This is for the Henderson farm," Cooper transmitted. On an open channel, making sure Summit's people could hear, the Apache's targeting system locked onto their communications array. One precision strike, and their coordination advantage vanished. Tank's voice crackled over the radio. "Main gate. Breached. These boys ain't ready for country folk who grew up hunting." Summit's response was chaos. Their professional mercenaries found themselves facing veterans who knew every inch of the terrain. Their armored vehicles were useless against roots only. Local farmers knew. Years of military experience, combined with home field advantage, proved devastating. "They're falling back to the town," Scout reported, "trying to use civilian areas for cover." "Not happening," Cooper replied. His Apache appeared over Main Street, where Summit's forces were attempting to set up defensive positions. No weapons. Fired. They didn't need to. The mere presence of the gunship, combined with dozens of armed locals emerging from shops and homes, was enough. Sarah's news teams captured everything, Summit's mercenaries surrendering to farmers and shop owners. Local police taking custody of illegal weapons, veterans securing documents before they could be destroyed. "Jim!" Ghost's urgent call cut through the victory. "They're burning records at their satellite office. Got a whole cleanup crew trying to hide evidence." Cooper banked the Apache hard, heading for the location. Below him, pickup trucks full of defenders were already converging. Summit had spread themselves too thin, trying to hold too much territory against people who knew every back road and trail. The satellite office was a fortress of glass and steel on the edge of town. Summit's cleanup crew had barricaded themselves. Inside, smoke rising from their document destruction. They never saw Tank's team coming through the underground parking garage or Scout's people rappelling from the roof. "Building secured," Tank reported. "Got a whole lot of papers they didn't burn fast enough. Ghost, you're gonna want to see this." The morning's operation had achieved more than just driving Summit back. They'd captured proof of everything. The water rights scheme, the weapons trafficking, the political corruption. But most importantly, they'd shown the entire state of Texas what happened when corporate power tried to crush a community. Cooper landed the Apache in front of the Summit building, its shadow falling across the corporate logo. Local sheriffs were already cordoning off the scene, while FBI agents, who'd been quietly monitoring the situation, finally moved in. "Still think we're just dumb farmers?" Cooper asked the captured Summit executives as they were led out in handcuffs. But his victory was tempered by experience. Senator Matthews hadn't shown himself once during the battle. A man like that always had contingency plans, always kept his real evidence of corruption elsewhere. "Stay sharp," he told his team as they secured their gains. This was too easy. Matthews won't take this lying down. Sarah approached with her camera crew, gesturing at the scene around them. "Want to make a statement for the record?" Cooper looked at the gathered crowd. Farmers, veterans, local business owners, all united against corporate greed. "Just tell them the truth. Today, the people of Texas reminded Summit Development that some things aren't for sale." The battle was won, but Cooper could feel it in his bones. The real war was just beginning. Victory had made them careless. That's what Cooper would later realize, reviewing the moment everything went wrong. The signs had been there. He just hadn't wanted to see them. 3 days after their successful raid on Summit's offices, Cooper's team gathered to review the evidence with FBI Special Agent Karen Martinez. She'd been building a case against Senator Matthews for months, and their seized documents were the missing pieces she needed. "This is everything," Ghost said, connecting his laptop to the secure server. "Money trails, weapons manifests, bribes, blackmail material, enough to bring down Matthews and his entire network." That's when Cooper noticed something odd about the transmission signal, a split second too late. Ghost, wait. The screen flashed and every digital device in the room went dark. When they rebooted, everything was gone. Servers wiped clean. Backups corrupted, paper documents somehow missing from their locked storage. What the hell? Tank moved to secure the room, but the damage was already done. Check your phones, Cooper ordered, a cold feeling settling in his gut. Their secure communication network was compromised. Every safe house location, every supporter's name, every backup plan exposed. Sarah burst into the room, her face pale. Jim, Summit's forces are moving. They're hitting everything at once. All our storage locations, all our allies. They knew exactly where to strike. The truth hit like a physical blow when Agent Martinez drew her weapon, not on Summit's approaching forces, but on Cooper's team. Karen, Sarah stepped back, disbelieving. You're with them, always was. Martinez's professional mask melted into something colder. Matthews placed me here months ago, when we first got wind of Cooper's evidence from the war. Been feeding him intel ever since. Cooper's mind raced through every conversation, every piece of information they'd shared. With her, she'd helped coordinate their supporter network, knew every weakness in their defense. Explosions echoed across the valley as Summit's forces struck their vulnerable positions. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions. You have no idea what Matthews is really building, Martinez continued. This isn't about water rights or weapons. That's just the surface. What's coming? A single shot rang out. Martinez crumpled, revealing Doc in the doorway, his backup pistol still raised. Never did trust feds, he muttered, but the damage was done. Summit's forces had breached their outer defenses. Ghost's communications hub was picking up chatter from all directions, their supporters being rounded up, safe houses raided, evidence destroyed. Jim! Whiskey's voice crackled over their last secure channel. They're at the Henderson place. Pete and his family. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Cooper ran to the window. Smoke rose from multiple points across the valley. Summit's forces were executing a coordinated attack plan, one they'd been fed piece by piece over months of patient infiltration. Ghost, what can you salvage? Cooper demanded. Nothing digital. Ghost's fingers flew over his keyboard. But I kept one set of hard copies, old school like you taught us, hidden in... The window exploded inward as sniper fire raked the room. Ghost fell, blood spreading across his chest. The Apache, he gasped. Hidden compartment. Behind the... Doc rushed to Ghost's side, but Cooper could see in his eyes it was. Too late. Their intelligence expert, their friend, was gone. Move! Cooper ordered as more shots pierced the walls. Fall back to evacuation point Delta. Sarah, alert everyone who's still free to go dark. They fought their way to their vehicles, watching their community burn around them. Everything they'd built, everyone who'd trusted them, all compromised by a single betrayal. Where to? Tank asked as they sped away, Summit's forces in pursuit. Cooper looked back at his farm, at the Apache he couldn't reach, at the evidence now locked inside it, at Ghost's body, left behind in their desperate retreat. Into the hills, he said grimly. We regroup, we rebuild, we make them pay. But the cost had already been staggering. They'd lost Ghost, their intelligence network, their supporters' trust. Worst of all, they'd lost the evidence that could have ended this. Cooper's hands tightened on the wheel as they escaped into the gathering darkness. Martinez's words echoed in his mind. What's coming? What had they stumbled into? What was? Matthews really building out here in the Texas hills? And how many more people would die before they found out? Deep in the hill country, 20 miles from the nearest road, Cooper's remaining team huddled in an old hunting cabin that even Martinez hadn't known about. The mood was grim. Ghost's death weighed heavily on them all, and the sounds of Summit's. Helicopters searching the hills were a constant reminder of their failure. Got word from some of our people, Tank reported, returning from his reconnaissance. Summit's rounding up anyone who helped us, calling them domestic terrorists. They've got control of local media now, spinning the whole thing their way. Sarah worked her underground contacts through a series of burner phones. Not everyone's buying their story. People saw what really happened. They're angry, scared, but still willing to fight. Cooper studied their last paper map by lamplight. They'd lost almost everything in the betrayal, but decades of military experience had taught them all to keep fallback plans. Old supply caches, hidden routes, supporters Summit didn't know about. We still have one advantage, Cooper said, pointing to his farm on the map. The Apache. Ghost's last words. He hid hard copies of everything in it. If we can get to those files, place is locked down tight, Whiskey warned. Summit's got a full military garrison there now, using your farm as their forward operating base. Good. Cooper's voice was steel. Let them get comfortable. They think they've won. Think we're broken. That's when they'll get sloppy. Doc cleaned his medical supplies, checking what little they'd managed to grab in their escape. Ghost deserves better than this. Better than being labeled a terrorist, dying for nothing. He won't have died for nothing, Cooper promised. Martinez let something slip before Doc took her down. Whatever Matthews is planning, it's bigger than water rights or weapons trafficking. Ghost found something in those files that scared them, badly enough to blow their inside agent's cover. A quiet knock at the door sent everyone reaching for weapons. Scout's distinctive pattern relaxed them slightly, but they remained ready. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. Scout entered, rain-soaked but grinning. Found something interesting. Summit setting up some kind of facility out by the old copper mine. Heavy security, lots of specialized equipment going in. And get this, they're bringing in nuclear engineers. The team exchanged worried looks. Nuclear? Tank whispered. What the hell are they building out there? Whatever it is, Cooper said. That's why they needed control of the water table. Cooling systems, waste disposal. You need a lot of water for nuclear operations. Sarah was already connecting dots. Matthews chairs the Senate Energy Committee. He's been pushing for private sector nuclear development, fighting regulations. This isn't just about Texas anymore, Cooper realized. They're building something out here that could poison half the state if something goes wrong, or if something's meant to go wrong. The implications hung heavy in the cabin's darkness. They weren't just fighting for their homes now. They were racing to prevent something much worse. We need those files, Cooper decided. But first, we need to rebuild. Summit thinks they've scattered us, isolated us. Time to show them what happens when you back country folk into a corner. He looked at his remaining team. Battered but unbroken. Ghost's death would be avenged, but more importantly, his final discovery would not be in vain. We go quiet, Cooper ordered. Build our network back up piece by piece. But this time, trust no one outside this room. Summit has no idea what Ghost found in those files. That gives us time. The team nodded grimly. They'd lost a battle, lost a brother, but the war was far from over. In the hills of Texas, a resistance was about to be reborn. 2 weeks of careful planning had led to this moment. Cooper's team gathered in an abandoned ranch house, going over their final preparations. Satellite photos of his occupied farm covered the walls, along with thermal imaging of Summit's patrol. Patterns that Scout had painstakingly documented. Guards change at 200, Scout reported, circling points on the map. 3-minute window when the Apaches least watched. Problem is the new security system they've installed. Already handled. Tank said, holding up a device he'd built from scavenged electronics. This will duplicate Ghost's old override codes. Won't last long, but it'll give us our window. Cooper studied the faces of his team. They'd been through hell together, lost friends, seen their community torn apart. Now everything hinged on one desperate mission. Latest intel from Sarah's sources confirms it, Doc said quietly. Matthews is bringing in more nuclear materials next week. Whatever they're building out there, it's almost operational. Whiskey cleaned his weapons with mechanical precision. Still don't understand why they need a nuclear facility in the middle of nowhere. Think about it, Cooper replied. Private. Nuclear facility, hidden from regulators, controlled by a corrupt senator with ties to foreign weapons dealers. If something were to go wrong here, they could hold the whole state hostage, Tank finished. Or worse. A truck approached outside, Sarah returning from her reconnaissance. Her face was grim as she entered. Summit's moving up their timeline. Matthews is coming to inspect the facility tomorrow night. Cooper's jaw tightened. Then we move now. No more waiting. They gathered their gear in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of Ghost's dog tags hung heavy around Cooper's neck, a reminder of the price of failure. If this goes wrong, Cooper told them, if we don't make it to the Apache or the files aren't there. Every government agency thinks we're terrorists. There's no backup, no rescue. Ghost believed in this enough to die for it. Doc said, that's good enough for me. They shared one last meal together, trying to ignore the possibility that it might be their last. Sarah had gathered their remaining local supporters. They would create diversions across the valley, drawing Summit's forces away from the farm. Remember, Cooper said as they did their final equipment checks, we're not just fighting for our homes anymore. We're fighting for every family in Texas who'd be at risk if Matthews gets his private nuclear playground. Tank clasped his shoulder. Give the word, boss. Cooper looked at his team one last time, the finest people he'd ever served with, willing to risk everything to stop something bigger than themselves. Ghost used to say that the thing about Thunderbirds is that they always strike when you least expect them, Cooper said softly. Time to live up to that legend. They moved out into the darkness, spreading across their positions. The night was clear, stars bright over Texas hill country. Somewhere out there, Summit's forces thought they were secure in their victory. They were about to learn otherwise. The valley erupted in coordinated chaos. Sarah's network of supporters triggered simultaneous diversions across 3 counties. Mysterious fires, false sightings, emergency calls that demanded Summit's attention. Like a fist slowly opening, their forces began to spread thin. Cooper watched through night vision as Summit's quick reaction force deployed, leaving his farm defended by a skeleton crew. Years of combat experience had taught him that even elite soldiers were vulnerable to the oldest trick in the book, divide and conquer. Team 1 in position, Tank whispered over their encrypted channel. Team 2 ready, came Doc's response. Cooper gave them one last instruction. Remember, non-lethal only. These guards might be mercenaries, but we're not adding any more bodies to this fight. Tank's homemade EMP device killed the farm's power grid precisely at 0200. In the sudden darkness, Summit's remaining guards activated their backup systems, exactly as planned. The surge overwhelmed their jury-rigged security network, creating a cascade of false alarms across the compound. Moving, Cooper transmitted, leading his team through the gap in their perimeter. They encountered the first guards by the old cattle pen. Before the mercenaries could raise their weapons, Doc's modified. Tranquilizer darts found their marks. Tank caught both men before they could fall, dragging them silently into the shadows. East side clear, Scout reported, but we've got vehicles incoming. 10 minutes, tops. Cooper moved faster, keeping to the shadows he knew by heart. This was his land. Every tree, every dip in the ground, every creaking board was an ally. Summit's forces were trained for urban warfare and desert combat. They weren't prepared for farmers who'd spent lifetimes learning every inch of their property. The Apache waited in his barn, surrounded by Summit's sophisticated security measures. Cooper almost smiled. They'd fortified the obvious approaches, but missed the old storm drain that ran beneath the structure. Now, Cooper ordered. Across the valley, Sarah's people launched the second phase of diversions. Emergency flares lit up the night sky, drawing Summit's air support away from the farm. The remaining guards clustered at the defensive positions, expecting a frontal assault. Instead, Tank's team emerged from the drain directly beneath the Apache. Cooper's hands found the familiar maintenance panel, remembering Ghost's last words. Behind it, wrapped in waterproof material, was a thick folder of documents. Got it, Cooper breathed. Fall back to... Brilliant spotlights suddenly illuminated the barn. A voice Cooper recognized as Martinez's replacement boomed through a megaphone. Targets acquired. All units converge. They'd been betrayed again. Change of plans. Cooper ordered, sprinting for the Apache's cockpit. "Everyone get clear. I'll give them something to chase." The Apache's engines roared to life as Summit's forces converged on the barn. Cooper's muscle memory took over, pre-flight checks condensed into seconds, systems spinning up with familiar urgency. Through the windscreen, he could see his team, disappearing into the darkness, Ghost's documents safely in their possession. "All units, take down that helicopter." The order crackled over Summit's frequencies. "Do not let them escape." Cooper smiled grimly. They still didn't understand. This wasn't about escaping. It was about giving his people time to get clear with the evidence. The Apache lifted off just as the first RPG streaked through where it had been moments before. Cooper banked hard, using the barn itself as cover. From the sudden barrage of gunfire, Summit's forces had finally shown their true colors, abandoning any pretense of being a legitimate security force. "Moving south," Tank reported. "Heavy pursuit, could use some distance." Cooper swept low over the pursuing vehicles, the Apache's presence forcing them to scatter. He didn't fire, didn't need to. The mere threat of the gunship's weapons was enough to break their coordination. "Jim!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Matthews just landed at the nuclear site. He's evacuating key personnel. They're going to destroy the evidence." A spotlight caught the Apache, followed immediately by surface-to-air missile-lock warnings. Cooper dropped flares and dove into the valley's darkness, terrain-following skills, keeping him mere feet above the ground. "Got 2 choppers incoming," Scout warned. "Military grade. They're not playing around anymore." Cooper pushed the Apache harder, drawing their pursuers away. From his team, the night erupted into a deadly dance of aircraft, weaving through the hills, warning systems screaming as missiles sought their targets. "Package secure," Doc transmitted, "making for the fallback point." Cooper allowed himself a moment of relief, before rolling hard to avoid another missile. His team had the documents. Now he just had to survive long enough to... The night lit up like day. A massive explosion blossomed from the direction of the nuclear facility, followed by secondary blasts. "Matthews is burning everything," Sarah reported, horror in her voice. "They're destroying all the evidence of what they were building." Cooper made his decision. Banking hard, he turned the Apache toward the facility. If Matthews wanted to destroy the evidence, he'd have to go through a very angry Thunderbird first. "Remember what Ghost died for," Cooper transmitted to his team. "Get those documents to safety. I'm going to make sure Matthews doesn't slither away this time." The Apache surged forward, leaving its pursuers behind. Ahead, smoke rose from the nuclear facility, and Cooper could see helicopters preparing to extract Matthews and his inner circle. Time to remind them why thunder always follows lightning. The nuclear facility blazed against the night sky as Cooper brought the Apache in low. Through his targeting system, he could see Matthews and his security detail rushing toward their escape helicopter. Behind them, teams of men were systematically destroying evidence, setting charges to bury their secrets forever. "Sarah, you getting this?" Cooper transmitted, activating the Apache's camera systems. "Broadcasting live," she confirmed. "Every news station in Texas is picking up our feed. They're seeing everything." Matthews' security forces opened fire on the Apache, but Cooper had faced worse in actual war zones. He positioned his gunship between Matthews and his escape route, switching on his external speakers. "Senator Matthews!" His voice boomed across the compound. "The documents are already safe. Might want to reconsider your exit strategy." He could see Matthews shouting at his men, desperate to reach the waiting helicopter, but Cooper's presence had caused confusion in their ranks. These mercenaries hadn't signed up to be exposed on live television. "Jim," Tank's voice crackled through, "we've got FBI teams moving in, the real FBI this time, state police too." Sarah's broadcast got their attention. Cooper kept his focus on Matthews, who had finally realized his position was untenable. The senator grabbed a radio from one of his guards. "You think this changes anything?" Matthews' voice carried over the channel. I own half the judges in Texas. By tomorrow, those documents will be classified as national security threats. Maybe, Cooper agreed, keeping the Apache steady. But there's something you didn't know about Ghost. He didn't just keep paper copies. Right on cue, Sarah's voice came over all channels. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now receiving data streams from multiple sources, financial records, weapons manifests, and detailed plans for an unauthorized nuclear facility designed to... Matthew's face contorted in rage. He raised his sidearm, firing uselessly at the Apache. The gesture of futile defiance was caught perfectly by Cooper's camera system, broadcasting live across the state. Ghost set up Deadman's switches, Cooper explained, almost gentle now. If anything happened to him, the evidence would automatically release to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. He just needed us to keep you busy long enough for the uploads to complete. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Matthew's security forces were already dropping their weapons, stepping away from their employer. This is for Ghost, Cooper said, switching off his cameras, and for every farmer whose life you tried to destroy. The Apache's spotlights pinned Matthews in place as state police vehicles swarmed the compound. The senator dropped to his knees, decades of corruption and violence finally catching up to him. Cooper kept watch from above until he saw Matthews in handcuffs, led away by legitimate federal agents. Only then did he key his radio one last time. "Thunderbird returning to base," he transmitted. "Mission complete." Behind him, the nuclear facility's fires burned like a funeral pyre for Matthew's ambitions. But ahead, dawn was breaking over Cooper's Valley. Time to go home. Sunrise found Cooper standing on his porch, watching as federal agents combed through the remnants of Summit's occupation. His farm still bore the scars of battle, but like the rest of the valley, it would heal. Already, displaced families were returning to their homes, escorted by state police, who now understood which side justice had truly been on. Sarah's news coverage had transformed public opinion overnight. Ghost's Deadman's switch had released thousands of documents exposing not just Matthew's nuclear ambitions, but decades of corruption that reached into every corner of the state government. The evidence was irrefutable, and the dominoes were falling. "You should see the headlines," Doc said, joining him with coffee. "They're calling it the biggest corruption bust in Texas history. Matthews and half his cronies are looking at federal charges." Cooper's team gathered around him, watching the valley come back to life. Tank and Scout were already helping neighbors repair damaged homes. Whiskey had his helicopter in the air, guiding families back along safe routes. Even in victory, they remained who they had always been: protectors, builders, community. "Ghost would have loved this," Cooper said quietly, touching the dog tags he still wore. "He always said the truth was the best weapon we had." Sarah approached with a small granite marker, the first piece of a memorial they would build. Not just for Ghost, but for everyone who had stood against tyranny wrapped in corporate clothing. The inscription was simple: "For those who proved that some things aren't for sale." Together, they planted it under the old oak tree, where generations of farmers would see it and remember. 1 month later, Cooper stood before the Senate Oversight Committee, his testimony helping to craft new laws protecting farmers from corporate land grabs. The Apache remained on his farm, a reminder that sometimes justice needs wings to find its way home. Summit Development's assets were seized, with the proceeds creating a fund to help displaced farmers rebuild. The nuclear facility was being dismantled, under international supervision, its deadly secrets buried forever. Matthews and his conspirators faced trials that would keep them in prison for decades, but the real victory was smaller, more personal. It lived in the sound of children playing again, in farmhouse yards, in the sight of crops growing where Summit's forces had once parked their vehicles, in the way neighbors now watched out for each other with fierce, unflagging loyalty. Cooper's team stayed close, building homes nearby. They'd learned that some bonds run deeper than blood, and some missions never really end. Every sunset found them gathering on his porch, keeping watch over the valley they'd fought to protect. To Ghost, they would say, raising their glasses. To the Texas sky. And to the things worth fighting for. In the end, they had proved that even in the modern world, some truths remain absolute, that land can be sacred, that communities can be stronger than corporations, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a helicopter gunship or a pile of evidence. It's the unwavering conviction that some things must be preserved at any cost. The thunder had passed, but its echo would remain, reminding future generations that in the heart of Texas, justice still had defenders who knew how to fly.